Yep.
Hello, AnthroCon 2025. How are we all doing today? All right then. I see the fact that y'all are here for an arcade tech panel at 10 a.m. tells me two things. You've either seen my stuff and you love it, or y'all are nerds and probably both. Who here's a goddamn nerd? All right then, so welcome to my arcade tech panel. I hope you enjoy the show. So for those you don't know, let me introduce myself. My name is Tokens Arcade, or you can just call me Tokens. I am a person who's been an arcade enthusiast for over 15 years, cut my teeth in high school just as a hobby, and I make videos on TikTok about my arcade and retro game collection. I do it in fursuit because I just like being extra, and that's entirely the point of this fandom, being extra, isn't it? So, now on top, some of you might also know me for the game shows that I host at convention, such as Ooh Woo the Game Show, 11:30 a.m., DLCC 406, immediately after this panel. So, yes, I'm going to plug that as much as I can. So, now, while some of you might know me for hosting game shows at convention, this is actually a pretty new one in terms of me doing an educational panel. I workshopped this a little bit at Anthro Expo, but this is still a relatively new thing, possibly a gateway into me doing some more long-form content. So, I definitely await any input and stuff after this. So,
you're doing great so far.
Thank you. In terms of my background, I have, I wouldn't say I'm the ultimate arcade expert. That would be someone who's probably 80 years old and, probably entering a home soon. I have been collecting arcade games and working on them for over 15 years now. I've recapped monitors, I've changed out RAM chips, I literally saved a coin-op dartboard from being thrown in the dumpster 3 hours before a record blizzard hit my city. So from knocking on death's door to working, I've seen just about everything. So, the reason why I want to show this to you guys, not just because it's a passion of mine, but the reason why I'm particularly so passionate about arcade games is because they're a lot more mysterious than a lot of other forms of retro entertainment. If y'all have a nostalgia for something like an NES, how do you relive that nostalgia? Well, emulators for one thing, but you go on eBay and you buy an NES. That's pretty straightforward. But arcades are a little more mysterious, the cryptids of the video game world, if you will. Where do they come from? Where do they go? You remember playing them at a bar, at an arcade, at a movie theater, laundromat, but I'm willing to bet 99% of you never owned one or knew someone who owned one, unless you were like your parents that owned the business. And then one day you went there and they were gone. Where did they go? What happened to them? Well, here's me trying to pull back the curtain on what they do, how they work, and here we go. So, first things out of the way, safety disclaimer. Arcade machines, as you probably heard, can have a lot of high voltage in them that can absolutely do you some harm. So, bear in mind that what I'm showing today is the 101 introductory course. I do things at your own risk. Do your research, and I'll give you more information about that later. But I just want to get that out of the way. So, here's what we're going to be talking about today. Here's our scope. The main meat and potatoes of this panel will be arcade anatomy, the insides of a basic arcade machine, how they work from the plugs to the monitor, and everything in between. We'll talk a little bit actually I put those in the wrong order. We'll talk about where you can find different kinds of arcade machines, where I get my sources and things like that. Making your own machine, specifically one that isn't just a main cabinet, using parts from readily available. And then if we have some time, that's a big if, Q&A afterwards. So, what kind of machines are we going to be talking about? Well, primarily video games. I don't have enough time to go on to Redemptions in Pinball. That could be an whole lecture in of itself. So, I want you to there's so many different kinds of arcade machines. I can't cover them all in one panel, but I want you to take a look at the machine to my right here. This is Thundercross, inside of what you can barely make out to be originally an R-Type cabinet. This is what I would call an everyman video arcade machine. What are its characteristics? Well, this machine I'm showing here encompasses most arcade machines from the mid-'80s to the early 2000s, and technically a few beyond here. What's it got? It is a basic upright machine. That means you stand upright to play it. It's got a 19-inch monitor, but they could be as big as 25 or beyond. It uses basic 8-way buttons and a couple of simple 8-way joysticks and a couple buttons for each player, and is configured with a JAMA wiring harness. I will explain what that means in a moment. So, the goal here is that if you can understand how this machine works, you will have a good foot in the door for understanding how other machines work. So we'll be discussing primarily things like the wiring, the power supply, monitors, boards, etc., the inner workings of this machine. We will not be discussing things like specific controls, light guns, trackballs. They will get a mention here and there, but they've got some more unique stuff going on with them. I won't also really be going into a lot of modern art machines. You'd see it like Round One or Dave & Buster's. They aren't very accessible in terms of home usage. They've got a lot of things that make it hard to operate in a home. And I won't be going into TTL-style Pong games like that. That's a little too old. And also, you can please shuffle. There's people behind you, so if you can get a scoot on in, sit in the center aisles if you need to. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. So first, let's knock out the biggest and most important jargon out of the way. JAMA. What the heck is a JAMA? Well, it's an acronym standing for Japanese Arcade Machine Manufacturers Association, and refers to this edge connector right here and this wiring harness. You can basically think of this as the USB connector of the arcade world. It's a standardized interface consisting of 56 pins, 28 on each side, that provide the different connections and functions that make your typical arcade board go. Things like the power and ground wires, the speakers, point counters, test service switches, the controls for player 1 and 2, and this connector right here has been an industry standard for over 20 years. The idea was to basically make arcade games super cross-compatible. You see, in the beginning, arcade machines were anarchy. Every company was doing their own things. They had their own wiring systems, power supplies, voltages, monitor configurations, everything. And when you have an arcade operator that's keeping track of potentially over hundreds of machines, that can get difficult, especially if you're trying to convert one game to another, which was a common practice. Throwing in a board and things like that in an existing cabinet's cheaper than buying a new one. So the JAMA Consortium was formed to basically streamline everything into one convenient edge connector, where companies could do anything they wanted in terms of graphics hardware, RAM, ROM, whatever they wanted, but they all ended with this edge connector, which created insane cross-compatibility. Pretty much most of your favorite games use JAMA in some way. Mortal Kombat, R-Type, NBA Jam, Simpsons, Smash TV, RoboCop, Golden Tee Golf, all wildly different games from different companies, all unified by JAMA. I literally mean it when I say you can take the board out of a Mortal Kombat and a Street Fighter II, swap them in each other's cabinets, turn them on, and they will just work. Well, electrically speaking. I'm sure you realize that, Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat have very different physical layouts for buttons, but drilling some new holes in a control panel is considerably easier than, rewiring an entire cabinet. So this was a standard for a while, and it kind of died out in the mid-2000s as arcade games more like Redemption and PC-based, but that is the main thing we're talking about here. And the JAMA connectors connected to these, JAMA game boards. So the game board, as you can probably imagine, is the brains of how an arcade machine works. And it contains everything computational, the CPU, the ROM with the game code, RAM, graphics processors, etc. And they can be big or small, stacked boards, as small as a postcard to as big as a picture frame. But the idea behind this was that they were meant to be interchangeable, kind of like a game cartridge. Of course, the big difference is that on your typical NES game cartridge, that just contains the ROM data and sometimes some coprocessors. But here, it has everything. So think of it more like, instead of changing out the cartridge on the NES, the cartridge was glued inside the console and you changed out the whole console. Thankfully, with all consoles using the same wiring connectors. Wouldn't that be nice? So some of these boards were made for one specific game, but a lot of times, especially when this standard became standardized, a lot of companies would make their own personal architectures, kind of like a game console. Okay, here's our current generation of hardware, these are the CPUs and things like that. Developers, this is what you got to work with. And examples of these kind of standards included Sega System 8 and 16, which paralleled the Master System and the Genesis. Sega Naomi, which was a parallel to the Dreamcast and gave us games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Capcom had CPS 1 and 2, which gave us games like Street Fighter and all those sort of things, Final Fight. SNK had the Neo Geo MVS, which, an example of one of those boards right here, used these giant cartridges bigger than VHS tapes, which went onto this little board right here. So while these were kind of proprietary, but, oh wait, look down there. Yep, still JAMA. Still JAMA right there. I have a laser pointer, why wouldn't I use it? So, what can you find on one of these motherboards? Well, one thing, you'll find these things, DIP switches. These are basically physical hardware switches that control various settings of the game, sort of number of lives, difficulties, how much money to make the game go, etc. Now, Some older boards like this one could have, over a dozen different connectors and some, or switches, and some only had a few. And as time went on, they became fewer and fewer, where most of those settings got moved into the software of the game itself. Oftentimes, I don't have a picture of it. Usually, there's some kind of volume knob somewhere on the board itself for adjusting the volume. Again, so you didn't really generally have to deal with any external hardware for that. Again, that usually got worked into menus later on. And now earlier boards like the one I showed earlier were very arcade dedicated, but as time went on, you'll see that arcade boards become more and more PC-like. For instance, Killer Instinct actually has a full-size IDE hard drive just bolted to the cabinet and connected via a ribbon connector. Golden Tee Golf, which you can see right here, had a PCI slot for, yes, that is literally a 3DFX Voodoo card. Who remembers 3DFX cards for their PCs? Quite a few right here. And then when you get to a machine like those touchscreen Mega Touch machines, it's literally a Pentium 3 motherboard or a Celeron inside with no JAMA to speak of. And that's kind of the standard of what most arcade games are. They're basically giant PCs in a box with a few other kinds of proprietary hardware connected to them. And in terms of software settings, here's an example of one of my multi-game boards that emulates some older games. This Pac-Man and Galaga. And yeah, the disk switches are represented digitally in this case, in the menu settings. Now, the other thing about boards is that some of them have batteries. What were these used for? They were for saving things, not dissimilar to your Pokemon cartridges. The thing about batteries, though, is that they, die. I'm sure you're aware of that. They were used typically for keeping the bookkeeping, high score saves, settings, etc., but were also sometimes used for DRM. Stay with me, folks. DRM. Exactly. Which led us to things like this monstrosity right here, the Capcom Suicide Battery. And no, I'm not going to say unalive because I'm not doing that. That's lame. So the way that this works, early on, the ROM chips were just the game data on there, and if you had a ROM copy or a burner and had a board with compatible hardware, you could just copy ROMs and swap them and bootleg a game, which obviously they didn't like that, so they increased in terms of different types of DRM. Sometimes it would be special, like the Nintendo Versus had the PPU chips, which basically unscrambled the color palette data. Some had other dedicated chips. And then Capcom decided to come around where they had the ROM data encrypted and kept the decryption information on RAM chips. Can you see where this train's headed? Powered by the batteries. So if you tried to tamper with the board at all, the RAM chips lose power, and the decryption information goes bye-bye. In addition, however, if the battery were to just, die, they would also lose the RAM information. So you could be the most goody two-shoes, well-trained arcade operator, and you still get screwed over because DRM. I think that's go without saying. So if you're looking at arcade boards, please make sure you check if there's a battery in there and get that replaced ASAP. That being said, if you do actually find a board that has a suicide battery and it hasn't died yet, I believe the capacitors on them can actually hold. If you power the board and then take it apart to do it, the capacitors I think can hold a charge for up to an hour, so you have a little bit of a window of time, but again, that can depend on the age of the board and things like that. So now let's get the power going here. So what we have here is a basic diagram for the basic power circuitry of an arcade machine. There'll be some differences here or there, but this is pretty much the average. So we start at the beginning here with a wall plug. It plugs into a wall and has 3 pins. I hope you know how that works. Notice the green pin right here, that is our ground, and that kind of goes around and daisy chains to every individual component in the circuit to make sure that everything is grounded. From the power cord, we go into a fuse, typically a 5 amp, faster slow blow fuse, just to make sure nothing funky comes out of the wall, protects the game. Then into a little box called an EM, and also this is, what you see down here is pretty much this, but physically built. I use this for bench testing. Little fuse right there. Then this little gray box right here called an EMI filter, electromagnetic interference. 120 volts of wall power goes in, 120 volts of clean power, for getting rid of interference comes out. These aren't really as necessary today as they used to. Back then there was a lot more analog stuff going on in the air, but today it's a little more straightforward. So, making sense so far. Then fuse, plug, fuse, and a filter. We then go on to the AC power switch, which they'll typically have at least one of. It's just a single pole, single throw. It's on, it's off, it just fully cuts power. In addition, some cabinets might have a couple additional switches called interlock switches, which will be either in the coin door, the back door, or a combination of the two, and are basically switches where they need to be held in to keep the circuit going. So basically, if you were to open the machine with, while it's on, it will cut the power. Generally, that was more used for in case little kids, accidentally got in the machine so house they didn't, weren't touching high voltage. Less so for the arcade operator's safety. That then goes into the power distribution block, basically just a little plastic block with some tabs that split out your connectors here, and go in three different directions: the power supply, the marquee, and the isolation transformer. The fluorescent marquee fixture. It's a light bulb. I'm sure you know how a light bulb works.
No, I don't.
More interesting on the left is the switching power supply, this big metal block right here. Thankfully, like JAMA, power supplies are very standard on arcade machines in the JAMA era as well. This power supply right here supplies the low voltage DC stuff, namely plus 5 volts, plus 12 volts, and negative 5 volts. And yes, negative voltage is in fact a thing. What's it used for? Hardly anything. I wouldn't even worry about it. But yeah, these are pretty standard blocks with screw terminals right here. Now, those of you who are PC building enthusiasts might recognize those numbers as, yes, those are the same voltages that come out of your standard PC power supply. In fact, later down the road, you'll see that a lot of arcade machines start to incorporate straight up ATX power supplies in the machines because they're readily available and do that. Thankfully, this is a very easy component to find. You can buy a good quality one from HAP, Suzo HAP, for like 40, 50 bucks. I usually keep a couple of them on hand because they're the most common component to eventually fail. Like, oh, machine broken for $100? Oh, that's a darn shame. I'll take that off your hands. It works. That's what happened in my Outrun. And then on the right is the isolation transformer. It's this big, scary-looking block of lead, copper, and God knows what, that basically goes in between the monitor and the wall power to basically keep things electrically safe. And big important thing, do not ever plug a monitor directly into a power outlet. You need one of these in line, and what it does is it transforms things to an isolated fashion from I don't actually know how these things work, and it's not really important. It's physics things beyond my pay grade. Just know that if you're powering an arcade monitor, do not ever do it without one of these things. 120 volts of monitor killing power go in, 120 volts of monitor not killing power come out. All right, so we talked about the standard voltages, the kind that come out of your wall. Now we get into the spooky shit with monitors. Warning once again, CRTs can be dangerous. Try anything I'm saying here at your own risk. Now, with that being said, I'm sure you've all heard the rumors. Can't you kill yourself on one of those things? And, well, yes, you can. You can also kill yourself on a motorcycle and in a car and a lot of other things if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. So here's the thing. Yes, there is danger involved here, but I want to approach this with a certain level of respect, because the way that you make these things not dangerous is a very, standard process that has been documented for as long as tube TVs have been around. And like anything, if you follow the steps, do your due diligence, and don't piss around, you're gonna be fine. And I really want to emphasize that because these monitors ain't gonna get any younger. I had my own first time too, and some of us are going to have to pick up the slack for the 80-year-old dudes who are now in, hospice right now that originally probably put these things together at the factory. So again, proceed with caution, do your own research, but don't be too scared. So right over here is what you would call your typical arcade monitor. It's usually a 19-inch CRT for this area with a 4:3 aspect ratio. RGB color, often called a CGA monitor. I don't know if that's quite the same thing as the CGA things you would see on like old IBM computers, like the 5150s. I think they are the same connectors, and those can take like RGB color, but it's not. I assure you they can do more than those cyan, magenta, those ugly ass color palettes that some of you older folks might remember. A 320 by 240 resolution and a 15 kilohertz refresh rate. This is your average monitor. Most monitors use these specs regardless of the size, and there were a lot of different makers from Wells Gardner to Sanyo to Electrohome, but they all kind of orbited around these basic stats and these same mounting holes as well. These were pretty standardized as well. So, high-level parts of a monitor. Well, we've got our big glass tube right here. That's where the picture is shown and projected onto. The chassis, which is the main electrical board right here. that has all the analog components, and the frame, which holds it all together. And no, you're not mistaken here. For some reason, frame and chassis do not mean the same thing when it comes to arcade monitors. One actually is what, everything's attached to, and the other is a circuit board. I have no idea who came up with that naming convention. I would like to have a word with them. Anyway, so what can you find on here? Parts, pots, plugs, oh my. The chassis has things like the power input, typically a 2-pin Molex connector, and sometimes you'll see on like the Sanyo Nintendo monitors, like a Donkey Kong, you'll see what looks like a normal plug. Ignore this. Do not, no matter how tempting it is, don't plug it directly into the wall without a transformer. It'll be a bad day for the monitor and likely you as well. So, as for video, right here, it's typically somewhere between 6 to 8 pins for red, green, blue signals. Brown, positive and negative sync pins. Don't worry about the difference about what those mean. Some games use one, some games the other, some games use both. That's pretty easy to work out. The pots and knobs right here, as you might have seen on some older televisions, control things like screen size, position, colors, sync, etc. Some of these, like right here, you can control by hand, others not so much, and I forgot to add this picture for the second time. They do make these things called TV adjustment tools, which are basically solid plastic screwdrivers that you can poke into the business end and not get a sparky surprise right there. Now, if you were to mess around a little bit too much, we get a little too brave with the dials, you might get a good tingle right here. But if there's one part of a monitor that you do not want to mess around with without caution, it's this, the flyback transformer. Called so because if you touch this thing the wrong way, you'll be flying back across the room. I don't know if that's actually the reason why it's called, but we're going to roll with it. So this is the transformer that can generate literally tens of thousands of voltage that shoots straight into the tube. There are 2 knobs on it that are thankfully very heavily insulated for controlling the brightness and focus. And then the business end right here, the anode cup, a rubber suction cup with a couple hooks that hook onto this little hole on the top of the monitor, and that's where the juice comes straight out of. So, we've got some scary stuff right here. How do we tame this beast? Well, it's a very delicate, very arcane process that consists of, and again, I'm showing this stuff purely for demonstrational purposes, so the con doesn't sue me if someone gets to the hospital, try at your own risk. The big secret for how to tame a monitor is this object in the upper right corner. Yes, that is quite literally a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver with a wire and a spade connector duct taped to it. And no, I'm not joking, this is actually, or electrical tape. And no, I'm not joking, this is actually the standard way to discharge a monitor. Now, okay, yeah, there are some dedicated tools more specifically built for this that also have things like resistors. There's some weird stuff you have with like vector monitors for asteroids. But generally, this is how it's done. You get this little doohickey assembled, and you connect it to the bottom of the frame right here. So that's where the power is going to be dissipated into. You then take the screwdriver and slide it under that rubber suction cup until it touches the little 2 hooks under there. And obviously, don't touch the frame with your hand because that's where the spiciness is going into. Once you hit those clips, you should hear a little spark or a pop. You then take it out, set it down, and watch some TikToks for about 2 minutes while you then repeat the process again and again until there's no more pop. Press the screwdriver into the hooks, and congratulations, you're not dead, and you've tamed the arcade monitor. Exactly. And the reason you would be doing this is if you're doing things like, not so much the degaussing part, but that's usually done when the monitor's actually on, but usually for capacitor kits, because those little electrolytic cylinders do dry out over time and will need to be replaced eventually. Those parts have an expiration date. That's something for the 201 course, so we're going to move swiftly on from here. Now, that was a lot to get through so far with the spice. So who feels confident enough right now to shove a screwdriver into the business end of an anode into a monitor? Concerningly more than there should. Remember, this is a 101 course. But if you come across an arcade machine and you don't feel quite confident enough to tackle that, there are some other solutions. Namely this right here. What you see up here is what's called a Suzo-Hap Vision Pro. That's just one brand, but there's other ones like it. And what it is basically a modern drop-in replacement LED screen for vintage arcade games. The features of these things include, being the right 4:3 aspect ratio and 15 kilohertz refresh rate, exactly like the original monitors. They run at 12 volts DC instead of God knows what AC, thank God. They're very lightweight, and they not only natively support VGA inputs, but the CGA inputs too. These same connectors, pretty standard on most arcade games, will just shove right into these with also, while it's not shown here, you can get a frame that will adapt these screw holes right here into the carriage bolts that most arcade machines used back in the day. Drop-in replacement. And the other thing is that all the converting and things like that to make it work is inside the machine. No external converters required. Yes, there exists some CGA to VGA adapters and other types of things in you can find on Amazon. Don't bother with the cheap ones I've tried. They're not that good. You probably need something like a retro tank for something if you're going to go that extreme. But these natively support it, and the best part, it's only $300 new as of the time of recording right here. And so, yeah, this big old thing right here, and it is an industrial grade monitor. It's made for long lamp hours. These are meant for, industrial purposes. Now, is this thing as good as a CRT? Well, obviously not, but again, goodness knows there are some arcade purists that will swear off these things, but given the affordability and the fact that there will one day come a day where, the last CRT monitor will cease to exist, I'm just keeping track of time right here, for $300, this is a pretty good substitute. Drop-in replacements, good for making new machines as well. And again, the fact that it uses the original refresh rate and resolution gives it that kind of softness that if you were to plug it into VGA, it'll look too crisp, in my opinion. It'll look almost uncanny valley levels of crisp, whereas this, it's hard to explain unless you see it in person, but take my word for it, it looks much closer it's like you took a CRT projection and put it on an LED screen. That's not a great descriptor, but take my word for it. Now, that being said, if you do go with this route, please don't throw away the old monitors. Not only because of you can get fined for just throwing a CRT in the dump, but can I assure you there'll be a very nice old man or a TikTok hotshot like me that'll be more than willing to take those babes off of you because these things aren't getting any younger.
Yeah.
Whew, that was a lot of talk about monitors. Huh. How are y'all doing okay? You following me so far? Yeah. All right then, all right. Let's go into something simple right here. Let's talk sound. Thankfully, in the JAMA standard, sound is pretty straightforward. JAMA supports natively mono sound using a 10 to 15 watt 8 ohm speaker, usually a 4x4 or 6x9 speaker. That is a super common configuration of speaker. I'm not even joking when I've said I've had one machine that had a blown speaker and one that was missing a speaker. I literally just, once I brought it home and realized what the problem was, walked promptly down to my O'Reilly Auto Parts store down the street, bought a speaker for 20 bucks, walked back up the street, where it's working again. All right, so now as for sound amps typically are on the JAMA board itself where the dial was. Older games sometimes had an external sound amp, but that pretty much went away when JAMA came about. And again, sometimes later on the volume controls got into the software. Some games, like in the midway cabinets, like NBA Jam and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, had kind of pseudo stereo, aka two speakers just daisy chained together, just the same sound out of both speakers. But there do exist some JAMA boards that do support stereo, Neo Geo being a big one, where pin 10 on the JAMA harness, where the mono sound comes out, has the left channel speaker, and pin 11, normally unused, has the right channel. Technically, that breaks the JAMA standard, but the worst case scenario is that you have a two-speaker cabinet that has sound only playing on the left side, which is it'll electrically still work fine. Like I said, the other pin is normally unused. Then adding an extra wire to a cabinet that doesn't already have two speakers, not difficult at all. Marquee lights, not a whole lot to talk about here. It's a light bulb, but I did want to bring up the fact that the lights on the top where the marquee usually goes, and they're typically lit up with fluorescent tubes. This is probably the one part of the cabinet that, as much as people are like, oh, we got to be authentic, we got to have original hardware. This is the one part of the machine no one gives a shit about.
Yeah.
Because bulbs are a pain to work with, and they do actually have a real world cost. If you're it's not uncommon for arcade operators. If anybody watches the 8-Bit Guy, his Time Rift arcade, you might have seen in his video that he replaced all the bulbs in his machines with LEDs because he pointed out, these things draw quite a few watts each, and when you have several hundred machines in the modern day on top of the CRTs, that actually does add up on your electrical bill. In addition, some people try to replace these because, when these marquees are so old, the heat does potentially damage the marquees over time. Personally, I'd say if your marquee is really that sensitive and that far gone, you're probably just going to want to replace it anyway. And in a home environment, you're not going to be running these things 24 hours, 12 hours a day, or at least I hope you're not. So I personally just like to leave them as is. But it's also a bit of a pain because the starters for the things are also getting. I mean, you can still find them and they're cheap, but like if anyone saw my Galaga restoration video, I had to go, once upon a time, I could go to like any store and get these. I had to travel to 5 damn stores to get these. And hell, Lowe's sold the bulbs, but they just outright said, well, we just don't sell the starters anymore. Bruh. Why? Okay, so yeah, that's where we got it. And if you do end up going with the LED route, get something with a warmer color palette to match the original colors. Now for the control panels. So, this is where the buttons and wires are. They're typically locked with latches, like kind of briefcase latches inside the coin door. They just kind of reach up, pop, pop, and then they'll usually detach fully or they'll be on a hinge of some kind. Now, as for the buttons, here is what your typical arcade button looks like. We got the actual button itself. There's a spring inside there that pushes down these little legs onto the micro switch. There's also a nut right here. The shaft is about usually an inch in diameter, 1 inch diameter, and usually about 1.5 inches deep. That's pretty standard. That tightens it onto the control panel, and the actual micro switch looks like this. There is the little clicky thing on top and 3 pins. So the first one, this bottom one, is common ground. These are what you daisy chain in series to connect all the grounds together. As you can see on this example right here, the black wire, dot, 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 they're all just connected together, and there's a couple grounds on the JAMMA connector, but ground is ground, doesn't matter which one you use. There's pin 2 up here. Yes, 1, 3, 2. Again, I don't know who makes these design conventions, why, but that means normally closed. You can kind of see the lever right here where when you're not touching it, the circuit is complete, and pressing it breaks the circuit. I can't even think of a game that even uses that, so forget I even mentioned about that. And then normally open. So this is where your corresponding function goes to, the up, the fire, that goes under here. When it closes, click, shorts the ground, and that's what makes something happen on the screen. Joystick wiring looks very similar. The way these switches work is that they have a little leaf on there, a little metal tab that when the joystick moves around in the shaft, will press them around. The different joysticks support different directions, as few as 2, as much as 8, and even beyond. 8-way being pretty much the standard for the JAMMA era, where to get diagonals you would go on the diagonal, would click 2 switches together. The only thing you need to remember is count for directions. When you're looking at this side, you go it down. That's going to push up and things like that. Yeah, 8-way direction is the most common. Continuing with the control panels, how did games with more buttons or alternative controls work? So as you remember, on the JAMMA standard, it originally had 2 buttons, later 3, and I think 4 is kind of what you'll see now. But wait a minute, a game like Street Fighter, that has 6 buttons per player. How did that work? Well, that implemented something called a kick harness. I believe so named because it is what wired up the kick buttons in Street Fighter 2. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's where it got its name from. And it kind of refers to generically as any extra wiring harness that is beyond the JAMMA standard to add functions that JAMMA doesn't support. Usually there's a separate connector on the board to do that, and usually there'll be an internal standards, per company. All the Naomi games did the same thing. All the CPS2 games for Street Fighter use the same thing. It isn't, obviously, so it is different from JAMMA, but because it's a separate connector, that's perfectly okay, and it gives the companies flexibility to add more unique controls to their games. I think I missed it. I think I'm missing a thing right here. But so for things like track balls, there were dedicated connectors for. Actually, you can even see trackball right here for that sort of. Wait, I'm sorry. Look right here. There is the trackball. Goes down to there. Different connectors for different things. Now the coin doors. How do they work? How do the machines take your money? Well, they are electromechanical devices that basically your coin goes into the front, goes down a little ramp, and then goes into this rectangular-looking thing called the coin mech. It's a purely mechanical device that utilizes levers, springs, magnets, and levers and things like that to determine the size, weight, shape of a coin. You can have these for pretty much any kind of coin, from quarters to yen to various sizes of tokens. bad coins come out. One end go into the return slot. The other ones go ahead and hit. Oh look, another micro switch with a big, thin, long wire that it drops onto. You know, Archimedes, give me a lever, insert that quote right there. It clicks it and it credits the game. To simplify, a quarter lands on a button. I know, like when I first got into arcade machines, I was like, oh, they must be doing some super high-tech thing to make sure the quarter's about. No, it goes down a Rube Goldberg machine and hits a button. I thought it was going to be a lot more complicated than that. And these do their jobs. Like they do prevent you from putting like strings and slugs down there. But yeah, a coin hits a button. Dollar bill acceptors obviously have a little more scanning technology in them, but we're not covering that today. Now, other stuff on the coin inside the coin door is things like the coin counters, this little mechanical numerical reel, which is basically like an odometer in a car, but for arcade machines. Every time you hit a quarter is inserted, it goes click, and it shows how much has been inserted. For example, I think this came out of my Asteroids Deluxe, and this machine, sometimes they'll just have one mech for everything, or other machines will have two. Like this one counted for both coin slots, so I think the left one had, 22,189 quarters. So this machine weighed, at that point, that machine had $6,000 worth of quarters go through it in its working life, and I'm guessing probably something similar down here. Now, some mechs, some coin things will just, both slots will credit the same mechanism, but for other games like The Simpsons and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where the slot you insert correlates to like what happens in the game, like what characters you select, they'll often have a separate coin mech for each. So this makes it easy to tabulate the earnings of a game. Now, in the event you need to work on a machine, they have a thing called a service switch, which basically lets you credit the game without kicking the counter so you don't mess up the bookkeeping information. There's also a thing like here called a test switch. This is where it's something you flip and will open up hidden menus for things like diagnostics, configuring different settings, options, bookkeeping, etc.
Like
and one other thing you'll often find not so much in the JAMA standard, this isn't really something you'll encounter often for these kind of games, but I want to bring it up because it's funny. The slam switch. So who's familiar with the tilt mechanism in a pinball machine? Yes, so a similar thing did exist in some arcade machines back in the day. This is a leaf switch, literally a couple stacks of wood and metal strips with a weight on it that was bolted to the coin door, where if you kick the machine, it'll either A, scream at you, which is what will happen on an asteroid, it'll just go beep. Please don't try that if you actually see an asteroid. They will know if the machine's screaming at you, or it will hard reset the machine, take your quarter, and game over. That'll teach you. So yeah, I'd always find that funny that you can make an arcade machine scream if you handle it hard enough. And in terms of what you see in the test. Test settings, here's my Asteroids machine that shows what revision ROM it is. It shows some geometry tests for the monitors, the brightness of the lines, and then the binary for what each dip switch is currently set to. The booting of one of my multi-boards shows, color things. It's doing a little self-test right here. Up in my Golden Tee, you see an individual monitor or individual screen for testing each of the buttons and making sure the track balls are calibrated, the dollar bill's working, et cetera, And then over here we see bookkeeping audits for things like how many times someone inserted one coin for a game, how many two coins available, all the money information basically. So that was the section of arcade anatomy. Do you feel edumacated yet? So, now, here comes the biggest question, the biggest thing that in all my days of TikTok and arcadery, everyone wants to know. Where do you get these machines from? Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, floofs and queers of all kind, my big secret is Facebook Marketplace. I know it's a little anticlimactic, but the fact of the matter is, I have probably owned approaching 24 machines in my that have come in and out of my house over the years. I think I have 15 or 16 right now, and probably 3/5, 3/4 of the 2/3, whatever, came from Facebook Marketplace in some cases. The only reason I bother to keep my Facebook account these days, because God knows Mark Zuckerberg is testing my patience every day, but it is a very easy and intuitive way to find these machines, and also with the fact you can't have marketplace like Facebook pages. It's a good way to build community. Because goodness knows you meet someone, you find someone on here, you meet them. You will find a very common pattern of real estate agents being arcade collectors. I could probably name close to a half a dozen people that are real estate people that collect arcade machines. Presumably, they're able to afford all the areas to have all these machines at. But yeah, you go there, you meet people, let them know what you're looking for, that sort of thing, and that's how I end up getting my red tents. At one point I had 4 of them in my house, so that's a story for another day. And the other more interesting thing, though, is auctions. Yes, dedicated arcade auctions are, in fact, a thing. Sorry I don't have any pictures for you. Just imagine an old 50-something-year-old man going, all right, we got a Galaga over here. This one's an all-time classic. Let's start the bidding. Yeah, that sort of thing. Dedicated arcades auction. These are typically held in locations like a hotel or a mall. There's one that I will be making a video about shortly that I got my Carnival machine from. There's a sneak preview for what's to come. Where you go into this location, you sometimes pay an entry fee or you get your ticket. You go in there bright and early, like 7 or 8 in the morning. You check out the machines, play them all you want. Everything's on free play. Usually the coin doors are unlocked. Open them, inspect them, do whatever you want without getting too crazy. And then when the clock strikes noon, the bidding begins. Typically, when you go to a venue like this, the machines will often be sorted into kind of categories. Usually, we got some fully working games. We have fully working games in one area. You know, they might have a few quirks here or there, but you pick them up, you can start playing them. Usually, in another corner, they usually be problem children, something that has a little more something serious wrong with it. The board's not booting, the monitor's not on, the cabinet's rough, something like that. Usually, some parts machines, you know, ones that are just you buy for parts, individual parts like, you know, motherboards, joysticks, marquees, and things like that. But the thing is, it's not just arcade machines you'll find there. You'll find pinball machines, jukeboxes, slot machines, like basically gumball machines, basically any crane games, like just about anything that you can insert a coin into that's entertainment purpose, these places will have. Now, here's the thing. Now you can get some good deals, like really good deals at places like this, but there is a catch. You gotta come prepared. Now, when you go as standard for auctions, there will be a fee associated with it. Now, forgive me, that's actually I kind of pull that as an average. The one I went to, you paid on top of 7% sales tax, in this case in Iowa, you paid either, if you're paying cash, it's 10% auction fee. If it's card, it's 14%. So, you know, if you're going there to get a discount, bring, you know, a good load of cash with you. The big catch with these, though, is that they expect you to transport those machines the same day. You buy it, it's yours, you got to take care of loading it out. So bring your trucks, bring your trailers. I usually bring a tool bag with me, you know, for testing things, if I need to unbolt certain parts of the cabinet, you know, if they need to be separated, you know, things like that. But if you're able to come prepared and you have the room for it, you can get some crazy deals here. I have seen mostly working sort of 90s or mid-80s pinball machines go for just over $500. I once saw a pair of rough Neo Geo cabinets, one that had like a rough-looking monitor, the other had that's a cabinet damage, sell for $150 each. The same dude bought both. Take a wild guess what he did. Nice. I once saw a Simpsons machine with some rough side art on it go for $400, otherwise fully working. Damn. But I forgot to put it on here, but the craziest thing I saw at one of these auctions is this Raw Thrills X Games snowboarding machine. I'm pretty sure I've played this game at a Dave & Buster's. Went for, fully working, I'm not even joking, $10. Because it's a ginormous machine that most people don't have the room for, but one guy did and bought it for what was it, 10% sales tax and $11.70. Hats off to him. Now, expensive. On top of the, I just want to keep track of time here. Now, how do we pull this all together? If you don't want to go for an original machine, you can actually get a machine of your own assembled using something like this. How can you apply it? You can actually build an arcade machine that isn't just a main cabinet. And to that, I introduce you to this. This is the iCade 60-in-1. This, I would consider, like, what is the most entry-level arcade, like, real arcade JAMMA hardware board you can buy? This thing right here. It is probably the most famous / infamous JAMMA board of all time. Famous because, again, of how accessible and ubiquitous it is. I showed you the menu in the song. It's like, oh, yeah, I've seen that before. Infamous because it has been used to convert like other original games into a cheap multi-XXX game, and what, that was an original Galaga? Why? So it has a little bit of a bad reputation for that, but I still stand by these things for the benefits it has as being affordable. $50 and you get 60 classic games on there. Your classic essentials, Galaga, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, pretty solid emulation on there. A few games have some sound ports, but otherwise perfectly good for the price. Easily available. These boards have been made since like the early 2000s. They have no signs of stopping. There is a lot of pre-made hardware and control panels built to support these things. Zero software setup. You plug it in, you go. Unfortunately, you can't really add your own games to it. It doesn't have a USB connector or anything like that. If you want a little more advanced, look for a Pandora's box. That has some more advanced hardware, but yeah, ease of software setup. Essentials, quality over quality. Again, Pac-Man, Galaga, your main verticals setups. The other thing that's nice is that all budgets are accounted for here, because basically every major, with the exception of the JAMA harness and the bare minimum of the buttons, you can have all sorts of ways to set this up, because you can build a switching power supply like I showed earlier, or look, Molex connector for a regular ATX power supply, and like this thing draws barely any wattage. You can get one from your granddad's 20-year-old computer and they'll work fine. You can use an original CGA monitor or one of those Vision Pros, or just use VGA, as you can see right here, and plug it into any monitor you find at Goodwill. You can use a 15-watt 8-ohm speaker, or, hey, hand me the aux cord. Use literally any speakers that have an aux input. And it does have games like Arkanoid and Breakout on here, which it will have connectors for up to 2 trackballs if you're doing a cocktail configuration, but the games also work with joysticks as well. So, like I said, all your options are available right here.
Damn.
As for controls, so, depends on how hard you want to go. You can get plain generic buttons on Amazon that work perfectly fine. The two big dividing brands right here are Suzo Hack, which is basically the American standard. This kind of shape of joystick, I believe, maybe originated with them. They make all sorts of devices, basically any type of input device, dollar bill acceptors, card scanners they make. And they're kind of the standard feel for what you would expect in an American arcade. Sanwa. If you're a fighting game weeaboo here, you probably already know about Sanwa. If you're friends with a fighting game weeaboo, you probably also know about Sanwa and have learned so against your will. So they're kind of the Japanese industry standard and are famous for a lot of fighting games. Note for these things too, they do work a little bit differently in terms of mounting. One is meant for kind of sheet metal and plastic control panels. This one's meant to go into wood. You can use it this one either way, but just bear that in mind. And they're great. They're like some of the, people swear by these for a reason, but it's a little overkill for something like, what I showed earlier. You could use a big, a fighting game tournament ready stick for Pac-Man, but why? But yeah, so up to your budget. Now cabinets. Unfortunately, I can't help you out much here. I am an electronics guy, not a carpenter. That being said, there are a lot of pre-built cabinets, IKEA-style things you can make to put whatever controls or monitor styles you want in. Arcadeshop.com actually has some cabinets that you can drop in, put a 60-in-1 control board into. This board right here was kind of built around the 60-in-1. Buy your own board and use a lot of compatible things right here. You could stuff all the parts I just described right here into a shoebox, and it will work. I literally did that when I built my first arcade machine.
Oh.
Now, where can you learn more? Well, forums. Because for the record, yes, forums do in fact still exist, and thank God, because please, if you're a game developer of any kind or have anything with technical support, please do not make Discords. Use forums, because they need to be archived. Now, this one right here is called Claude, Killer List of Video Games, forums.arcademuseum.com. Here is the QR code if you want to visit this. This place it's not the only forum of its type, but this place is basically Stack Overflow of the arcade world. Tons of people selling, not only giving technical support for arcades, selling trading machines. I got some of the stuff from my clone pod cabinet there. People sharing restoration progress, ISOs and files of ROMs right here. And while this may be old, I think it's pushing over 20 years old, it is still alive and kicking as ever. Lots of very seasoned people frequent these forums, and I have gotten some incredible help from them through some dire problems. Do know for this particular one, they do expect you to pay a single $1 to PayPal as security protection. It goes towards their preservation society. They're old farts that run this, but just bear that in mind. They're not trying to scam you, that's just how they do it. So, with only a few minutes, technically it's 49, that is the end of this panel. I can maybe do like 2 questions, make them count. Thank you very much so far. 2 questions, make them count. Hands up. Yes.
Could you, in theory, put a vector monitor in any kind of cabinet?
I mean, physically, yes. I mean, you still need a, huh?
Like, vector to run like a Street Fighter.
No, they work on 2 completely different technologies. Rasters go side to side and have color phosphorus and project color. Vector monitors do not. That is not a compatible thing. Yes?
So more of a philosophical question. What do you think eventually killed like the arcade in general? Was
What
it
ki-
the, like
I know what you're
unsavory nature that people
Yeah.
see with it, with like drugs and stuff back in the day?
I think, well, one thing, video games became more, okay, the thing that always until this day, gives arcades their edge is that they do things that you can't do in a home environment. Once upon a time, that was having video games at all. Then you had games that you had Atari 2600 at home. Oh, but the arcade machines are still more powerful. Oh, then later on, a lot of people cite Soul Calibur as being the point where it's like the arcade and home ports are indistinguishable. They started adding, okay, the tickets thing, that's something, for prizes, that's something you can't do in a home, or at least not easily. But eventually got to a point where home hardware surpassed, or at least equal to the point where that you couldn't just bank on the games being powerful. Once upon a time, arcades, you could stuff any hardware you want in there. You still can, but like that unique gimmick of having all this high arcade tech was no longer exclusive. So they looked on other things using more unique controls. Obviously you don't really have trackballs in a home environment. We got these big environmental things for things like those Star Wars pod racers. So yeah, arcades have always stood because they'll always find a way to distinguish itself and give you a unique experience that you can't replicate in a home environment that'll keep you coming back for more and more for generations to come. And with that, thank you for this for enjoying the presentation. And most importantly, I also just realized I never touched the microphone for any of this, so I hope this comes out on my recording right here. Oh. Yay. Hopefully my voice projects enough, but I am not done yet. I am going immediately upstairs to 406 DLCC for Uwu the Game Show. If you want to play some games right there, go right ahead.